Live a little bit late, and I do apologise for being so late in the day today. Uh, I've just been trying to sort out a few technical issues, and I think I've got them sorted. So hopefully everything will run smoothly this afternoon. The painting that we're going to be looking at today and working on today is another Volkswagen. Volkswagens. Volkswagens have been a big part of my life for the last few years. I have painted so many Volkswagens, you wouldn't believe it. Uh, and every one of them presents a unique challenge. And this one is no different. Here is today's painting. Well, the photograph that will become a painting. And this is from Carl, as a friend on Facebook. And this beautiful, beautiful customised Beetle is going to be what we're working on today. And I think you can see here it's going to present us with some unique problems to solve, and it's going to give us a chance to explore an awful lot of different painting techniques. So it should be interesting for those of you who are artists yourself, those of you who are indeed painters, because we're going to have to deal with a lot of masking, the creation of a fairly realistic but textured background there. We're going to have some strong shadows to deal with. We're going to have to deal with some texturing in the foreground there on the path. And then, of course, when we look at the car, it's tempting to say when you look at it, this car is just one colour all over. But of course it's not one colour all over. It is a couple of colours at least, and when we start getting into it, you'll see that there is actually much more to that blue than meets the eye. So, where are we going to start? I've got it drawn out, as you can see there. That took me quite a while to actually get everything how I wanted it, but it will give us a guide, and a lot of the time that is exactly what it's going to be, and a guide, just a guide really, because there's an awful lot of work to do in that paintwork especially, and in the texturing of the background to get this painting to come to life, that a few pencil marks on the paper can only just give you an indication of what you need to do and where you need to do it. It's a roadmap. I've got the chat active again, so anybody that's watching, please feel free to say hi. Hopefully I won't miss people like I was missing people yesterday, because I get so intent looking at the painting and working on the painting that the chat comes on the screen and I miss it. So by the time I come to answer the question, the person's already gone, which is a bit of a shame. So hopefully we'll get notifications and a little sound when anybody joins into the chat this time. So fingers crossed that'll work and I'll be able to respond better to you. This whole thing of live streaming really is a big learning curve. Not just dealing with the tech, not just dealing with how to get the technology working and all that sort of thing, but also myself, and actually the almost the endurance of it all. You know, if I'm just painting on my own, I'll paint for a while, I'll get up, I'll go and wander around, I'll put something on, listen to something on the radio, or put something streaming on YouTube in the background, all these sort of things. But of course, I'm quite aware that people are going to be watching this, so I am having to do it differently and in longer sessions, really. So yesterday, in particular, yesterday afternoon, I was really tired, and yesterday's painting was a real act of endurance. But today, I am fresh as a daisy, and we should be okay. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to work on the background. But before we work on the background, we're going to need to mask some things out. First of all, of course, we need to mask the edges of the car so that the background, as we work on it, doesn't in any way encroach on the car. Because if you see here and here, the edges on the car are very, very, very white and very bright, and they are going to be the brightest thing on the painting. And of course, when we're working in watercolour, that means that they are going to be the brightest thing and so they are going to have to be the white paper. So we need to preserve that. We've also got this to deal with here, this area here, which, as you can see on the little photograph that I've put up there, is a flare. This is a lens flare. This is something that you would not really get if you were just going to put the car in front of you and paint it. We get this because we've taken a photograph. But I found with these VW Beetles that when you do the painting, that lens flare, which adds these extra little rays here and here, and that come across the background and down onto the body slightly, it gives the painting a real little zing, and it makes the car sort of a little bit more, even more special. So I like to keep those things in. There are lots of things that the camera does. There are lots of things that lenses do that I will work very, very hard to counter. This, on the other hand, is something that I think enhances the photograph, enhances the final painting. So, looking at the painting, we're going to divide it into three sections. We have the background section, which comes down to the road here and here. Then we've got the road and the road surface, which is all over here, and of course underneath the shadows, in the shadows of the car and all that sort of thing. So we've got those to deal with. And then, of course, the car itself. So we're going to be dealing with the background first. So for that, I have got my trusty jar of masking fluid and my mapping pen. And I'm going to just go round the edge of the car and where the background foliage joins the road, and I'm just going to go around very quickly and mask off these areas. Now this masking will come off as soon as we have done the background. And then some of it will be replaced to cover the areas that we want to stay white while we actually paint the car. So there will be multiple layers of masking involved in this, which I know a lot of people find quite interesting to watch and interesting to work out, especially artists who are trying to learn watercolour, because I think we get the idea when we first start that the masking is literally just for something that you put on the beginning onto the white paper. Let's put it that way. That's one of the words that I'm looking for. But if you saw the painting that I did of the 3 Volkswagens a couple of days ago, you'll see that it can be used as a fantastic tool for saving parts of the painting that you want to be saved. And not just that, sorry, I'm rambling away here while I'm trying to concentrate on what I'm doing at the same time, which is, I'm finding it a little bit challenging. I'm finding it a bit like patting your head and rubbing your tummy at the same time. But I've done that slightly wrong, but I'll sort that out when it comes to it. Yeah. What I'm trying to say is that we can also use the masking as a painting tool, as a painting device in many respects. In terms of, we can put a colour on, let that paint its surface dry, and then we can add more masking, add another colour, then add more masking. It's a bit like printmaking, really, only probably backwards. You know, when you're making a print, you split everything up into individual colours, and then you do different passes of those different colours. There we go. There we go. And there have been occasions when the way I've done this has been to mask out. Actually, I'm masking the part that I don't need to mask. I've just realised I just need to come across here. Never mind. Nothing work to be worried about that. I have done this where I've just masked out the entire car very carefully. I don't know why I've decided not to do it that way today. Different ways of doing things, different ways of approaching things. Okay. So just let that masking dry for a minute. So maybe while that masking dries, what I can do is to what I can do is to put some masking onto the car that that's going to be there to the very end. Not the stuff that will be removed as soon as we've done, not that bit there will be removed when we've got the background in, but there are areas on the car that will need to be masked right through to the very end, on close to the end, and so let's put those on. Let's get those on. There's a glint here. won't bother with that patterning yet, I'll do that later. There is, that's up there, there's a bit here in the, in fact I'll do all of this reflection, the lines and the patterns in the reflections, they can actually be done now. Because they will stay until the end. There's a glint on the door just below the mirror here. There are a few glints coming down the edge of the wheel arch here that we want to save, and one there. Those we can leave. There's one here. See, not all these glints and things that I'm putting on at the moment, not all these will be white. Some of them will be tinted blue to give us the reflections in the bodywork. And they will, of course, also not be the exact same shape. Okay. As the masking fluid makes them. The masking fluid is a bit of a random, sort of harsh device, I suppose, in some ways. Because I'm working on textured paper, it's not going to give a beautiful straight line when you peel it off. It will be often quite ragged and jagged, but serves its purpose. And what I'm going to have to do then, you will see, is I'm going to have to go around around the car where the masking is, and just sharpen the edges up of the areas, but you won't see that until the very end. But which will of course be in a few hours' time. It took me quite a lot of paintings before I'd actually worked out this particular masking technique and this way of actually painting the car bodywork to really get that shine and get those reflections really working, because the bit that actually makes them look really impressive in the finished painting is the I think I can leave that bit. Yeah, the bit that makes something very impressive and glossy and shiny and shows the paintwork is all the reflections. You might think to get it to look really like shiny paintwork, you would relying on big areas of colour and big areas of the paint and everything. But in the end, it's actually much more the differences in the paint surface that actually give it that glowing shiny look. Now, how am I doing? We're nearly ready at the top, but not quite. I can see that parts of that top layer are still a little bit on the damp side, so we'll carry on doing some masking here. Pardon me, I do like to mask off actually most of the headlight chrome anyway. It's very easy to lose that that beautiful shiny white line around the chrome of the headlight. What's happening inside, we can probably sort that out without masking fluid. Even though it's going to be dark out, I am going to put a blob of paint where the little light there is going to go, because we want to be able to make it a very dark red. We don't want it to be a blue, which so we don't want the paintwork to go over it. This is a jaggedy, as I like to think, sort of lightning bolty sort of feel there. Okay. And there we go. And I'm going to mask the entire centre of the alloy wheels out. That will be dealt with in a different way when we get to it. So we'll take the whole of that alloy wheel out there. And the same goes for the edge of the tyre, because if you look at that photograph, you'll see that the edge of the tyre that shows up on it emerges gently from the darkness of the wheel arch. So we want to be able to sort of keep that feel as we put it in. So we'll keep that, and then it will be quite dark in the end, but it also keeps, that's it. I also need to just add a little line to the drawing here that I missed. It's difficult to in the shadows. It's difficult to actually know that you've got everything the first time. So I'm just going to bring the wheel down there a little bit. It will just emerge from the shadows, but that's it. Okay, let's get some masking fluid on this. edges with the mapping pen, and then I'll fill in the centre. With the colour shaper, which you'll see in a minute. See, I've got one or two more people joined in watching, which is really nice to see. I'd like to remind you all that there is a chat box there, and if you want to chat with me or chat between yourselves, I don't mind. Ask me anything, anything really, while we're doing this. You know, it's always nice if it becomes a two-way conversation. It helps me because I'm at the moment just constantly just stream of consciousness rambling, just trying to make what's probably quite a boring job of masking out areas not too boring for you all. Yeah? And short of singing you a song, which I'm not going to do because I'll get carried away and I'll make my hands shake. There we go. You have to put up with my it's important to try and make sure that you've covered the entire area of something like this when you're doing a big mask on a bigger area like this, because I'm gonna go over this in a broad way when we get to it. So let's just let that run a little in the other direction as well. Pad that out and get the light shining across it to it and see if there's any holes in the masking there. Oops, I've just realised I'm not on screen. There we go, you can see there it's glistening because it's wet. The top section here though is now more or less dry, so we can leave what I'm doing down here for the moment and start looking at that background. Hopefully if anybody does chat, I will notice your chats faster than I noticed them yesterday, because I've tried to make it so that it makes a sound when somebody chats. I found yesterday people were chatting to me and I was looking up and they chatted like 20 minutes ago and I'd missed it, so by that time they'd gone. Yeah. Because I don't expect you to stay. Don't worry if you would just want to pop in and out. You know, you can always come back later on, I'll still be here. This is a long haul. This is not something that is going to happen quickly. I think what I'm going to do first of all is we've got some sections over here in the foliage that are, pardon me, as you can see, it's blossom. So, although I said I'd finished with the masking, there will be some masking going on in a minute. But what we'll do is they're not bright white, so let's get a gentle wash that's slightly green and slightly bluey grey, but is very, 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 very faint, he says. We want it to be nice and wet, and we'll just put it on, and I'm going to do put on and take off in this area so that it does lighten up, so don't be too alarmed by how blue it's going to look. It's going to go up there, and we're going to take off as we put on to lighten it up, and also taking it off means it will dry faster, and I don't want it to have to spend all the time that I'm doing this with you literally watching paint dry. So let's dab that off again, and so it'll only take now a minute or two for that to be a surface that we can then work on with masking. What you don't want to do ever, and I mean ever, big rule this one, never ever jump the gun and put masking on top of paint that isn't quite dry, because you're going to find that all that happens is when you come to take the masking off, it's going to tear the paper. It's going to rip the paper underneath the masking, and you don't want that. So always make sure that if you're going to use this technique, that you make sure that you're patient and you wait until the paint is dry before you start putting any masking on. Patience is a virtue, I think, in the world of watercolour. It's it really is. It's I think watercolour painting is a bit like fishing. I think I mentioned this the other day, but I think it is. It's a bit like fishing. You know, with fishing, you prepare all your stuff, you prepare all your baits, and you make sure you've got all your kit, your rods and your nets and your hooks and all the rest of it. And you get your chair and your baskets and your boxes, and maybe you take a tent, whatever, and you take it and you set yourself up by the side of the water. You probably trogged all the way there, you know, got yourself sitting by the side of the water, and cast in, and then wait and drink in the peacefulness of the countryside. And I think personally that painting is a bit like that. When in watercolour, you cannot be incredibly proactive all the time if you want to do this style. Yes, you can do a watercolour painting in a few minutes. That's fine. Obviously you can do that. But we've got an insect here buzzing around. But you won't get the same effect. For this style, you have to give it a little fresh air, give it a little time, and it will pay itself back many, many times. I could at this point get a hairdryer on it and dry it out faster, but I don't want to run the risk of getting the masking fluid too hot and end up with that a problem that way. So we can certainly work on this area here. This area is nearly dry. Let's see what we're going to do. We're just going to get the masking fluid, and we're going to put on some textured shapes and textured bits, just following. Now this won't be 100% accurate with the photograph because I'm using the photograph as a guide. There we go. But I am not creating a photograph. I am not a photographer. What I am is a painter, and what I am doing is I'm creating a painting. So the things that I am doing here are meant to give an indication of what's there based on an interpretation, based on me looking at it and saying, yes, to me, yeah, I could represent that this way with this kind of brushstroke, with this kind of mark. And what I'm doing is I am doing what painting is. I am fooling your eye into thinking that you are seeing something that's there, when actually what you're looking at is pigment on a piece of paper. You're looking at paint on a piece of paper. I don't know whether any of you know the famous painting by, and I think it's Marcel Duchamp. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's Marcel Duchamp. And it's a painting of a giant pipe, you know, a smoking pipe. But written underneath it are the words, "Ceci n'est pas un pipe." This is not a pipe. And he's right. It's not a pipe. This is not a pipe. It is a painting. This is paint on paper. And everything that we do is making marks on paper or on canvas or whatever you're working with pigment, to trick your eye into thinking that you're seeing something that's not there. It's magic, really, isn't it? When it comes down to it, it's smoke and mirrors. It's like you're being like a conjurer, like a you know, je suis David Blaine or whatever Marcel Duchamp might have put, you know. Because it's all smoke and mirrors, it's all trickery. When I've finished here, there will not be a car on the paper. There will not be a car. There will not be trees. There will not be a road. There will be paint. Oh, that sounded good, didn't it? It's like those old maps that they used to say, there will be dragons, or whatever they used to say. But what I'm trying to do here is just create some shapes with the masking fluid. You can't really see it, I don't suppose, unfortunately. To be honest, I can hardly see it myself as it's going on. There is a lot of guesswork involved in this. But what I'm doing is I'm trying to, the flowers and everything that you can see in this area, and the blossoms, I'm trying to basically paint them with latex, so that when I have done the rest of the background, these, when I remove the masking, ought to be the flowers there, or the shapes of the flowers there, and we can, you know, anything that needs a bit of twiddling on, we'll work on with paint once we've done that. But I think that is probably going to be good enough. More masking is better than less masking, because you can't put it on after, you know, you can't. What we're doing is reserving white, or in this case a pale blue, and you can't, there we go, you can't put light on to the paper when you've taken it off. Well, you can, but that's another story for another day. there are different ways. You will see me add at the very end of this process. You will see me add the occasional glint, do the occasional little bit of sharpening up, and adding some highlights, but as few as possible. I think that's enough of the masking. That will dry very quickly, because it's only a few little bits. And just leave that to dry for a minute. Let's have another little look at the picture that we're working on. Again, I really need to find a way, because I don't think you can see it here, I really need to find a way that I can actually put the mouse pointer onto the screen here, so I can point things out to you. This is I'll have a look in the break, when I take a break, see if I can find a way of putting the mouse pointer on the screen. I'm moving it over the picture at the moment, but I don't think you can see it. If you can see it, please let me know. Aha! Good morning, indeed. Oh, is it morning? Hold on. Yes, you're in Texas. It's still morning, isn't it? Good morning, Karen. Now then, I just realised I just got. Perhaps I need to unmute that. I realised you just spoke to me. What time did you speak to me? It's 32 now. You spoke to me 5 minutes ago, and I didn't notice it. So my new system of getting some kind of alert every time somebody writes something on the screen isn't working. So I'm going to have another look into that. Spent ages working on that earlier on to try and get it to happen, and it hasn't happened. So fingers crossed. We'll sort that out eventually. Indeed, you will be seeing some new techniques today, because this is going to be a lot of masking. This is going to be a lot of flicking and all sorts of things we're going to have in this. Paint flicking, masking, really heavy shadows. I mean, if you look at the underneath of the car here and everything, and because of where the light's coming from, we've got some really strong darks, really strong heavy shadows here. That and the background itself is dark as well, and of course that's great working against this car, because the darker the background is there, the more the car's going to stand out. So it really is going to zing, hopefully. Like people have heard me say before, the way to make the bright bits bright, the way to make the light bits lighter, is to make the background, or what's against them, darker. It's contrast. And it is something that I found when I first started working in watercolour especially. I did find it quite difficult, because we're taught that we work in watercolour from light to dark, and we go steadily darker. And in a way, yeah, I get it. That's right. But it's knowing when to stop. And I think the temptation when you are learning and when you're developing your technique is to checking out too early. Let's put it that way. I know I would chicken out too early. I would paint and I would do this painting, and I'd think, that's it, I've done it, I've painted it, whatever. And then I would look at it later on and come back and look at it and go, oh, it's pale. It's pale and insipid, and it's not as bright as I want it to be. And then you start to realise that the way to make it as bright as you want it to be is to make it, take some of the excess off there, isn't going to make a difference to us. Is to make, sorry, so I have this habit of talking to myself at the same time. I was just taking a bit of one or two of the blobs of the masking fluid off so that it'll dry quicker. Yeah, I tend to go off on one. What was I talking about? Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, you tend to leave it to be too pale. And the way to make the painting brighter is to make the dark bits darker. So let's go on and do that in the background. Let's go back to the overhead picture. And we are going to put in the background a lightish green to start, but just in a particular, a little bit, one particular area. Let's do that now. Just a light sap green in this area here. With the occasional tinge of a yellow in there too. I don't know whether you can see it on your screen at the top here where I've just done that. Behind the car there is a bush that has a few leaves. There we are. That are showing, and I thought I'd like to highlight them in the same way that there's a few highlights there that we can have as well. So we'll just put that there. It will dry very quickly, that, because there's not much there, and the occasional blob, I think, maybe there as well, and there. We'll let them dry. What we're looking for in the background over and over and over again is texture. Texture. Painting foliage is not about painting individual leaves and individual trees. Most of the time it's not. You know, when you see, I mean, God bless him, you know, he was a great guy, but when you see Bob Ross there with his paintbrush and he's painting in his little trees, and as he used to call them, and he's there and he's got his fan brush and he's painting his pine trees with his fan brush and all that sort of thing. He is doing what we're all doing, as I say, we're trying to fool the eye into believing that something is there, but this whole thing of the way he would do it, all that, it doesn't work for me most of the time. Most of the foliage that I have to paint is literally a texture. I've got a window in front of me here. Behind I've got a big computer monitor on the windowsill in front of me that I can see what I'm doing and see the stream happening in front of me. But just beyond that, I'm looking out onto our garden, and there's a field beyond our back garden that then has a row of trees in it, and I'm looking, and our next door neighbour's plants are in the foreground on the right hand side, and I can see the occasional leaf highlighted. I can see the occasional, maybe a branch or whatever, but mostly what I am looking at is a mass of different colours and textures. And so what we're trying to do when we paint trees, when we paint foliage, in the sense of a background, especially like this, is what we're trying to do is we're trying to recreate different textures, and I like to do it with the masking, and then by using different combinations of wet and dry brushing. What I'm doing here now is I'm just putting a little bit of masking fluid onto that, in that area of that paint, of the bright paint that we just put on, and I'm adding it to the masking fluid that I put on earlier. And what it's going to do is it's just going to save for me a little bit of that yellowy orange paint. That's a bit splodgy, but that's it. Let that dry. Here we go again. It makes a change. You're not watching paint dry, you're watching latex dry. It's a bit different for you. There we go. So in the meantime, let's add just a little bit more masking down around the car. Let's mask out. I don't really see it there. If I turn it upside down, you can see what I'm doing. The running board, the edge of the running board, which will be blue in the end, because we're going to be putting a dark shadow around that at the bottom. Let's mask that out so that we don't run into a problem of, oops, we've gone over it, I don't think we're going to get it back, because you will struggle to reclaim it from the amount of dark that I'm going to put on there at the bottom of that there we go. Yeah, at the bottom there, you will struggle to reclaim it. So I don't want to lose any of it. It's going to be very, very, very dark below that. I think I'm alright there, because I'm just going to, yeah, I'll brush that in, that'll be okay. But that's a nice bit of protection for the edge of the running board there, just while the masking fluid that I put on the top dries. As I said before, the last thing you want to do when you are working with masking fluid is to get it in your brushes. Masking fluid and brushes is a really nasty combination. You know, especially your watercolour brushes. You end up with bits of masking fluid in a watercolour brush. You might as well throw it in the bin. You'll write it off. On the other hand, sometimes when you're working with foliage, and when you're working with random things, there is a time to use a brush and masking fluid, and what you do is you end up with this. Right, that is a bristle brush. You know, the sort they would use for oil painting more than anything, really. But I don't know whether there's enough light getting on it for you to see what it's like. Maybe a bit more light down here. If you'll see, that has been dipped in masking fluid over and over and over again over the years. So what you actually got is it's like a stamp. What I will do is to put masking fluid on in a random manner on a larger area. I wouldn't do it on an area as small as this, but on a larger area to put masking fluid on, you dip it in the masking fluid and you just use it on the surface of the paper, and it will stamp out random sort of foliage shapes. You can do all sorts of things. Masking fluid is a magical thing. If you really want to get in depth with masking fluid, of course you can watch me doing this on my little videos here, and that sort. But if you really want to be able to spend time sort of going into this sort of texture painting, that creates, in the end, can create wonderful, very realistic effects without actually doing individual painting of everything. If you want to do that, you want to study the works of Joe Francis Dowden. You know, and if you do, and if you get on one of his things, tell him that I am sending everybody to him, because I think discovering Joe Francis Dowden for me was a real, it was just, what am I trying to say? It was a revelation, because he works in such a way that he creates watercolours really quickly, actually, much faster than me. But he creates watercolours that when you look at them from any kind of distance, you do think you're looking at a photograph. It is incredibly photographic from a distance, but the closer you get, the more you realise that they are, what you're looking at is a massive different textures, and he's created these different textures by all these different techniques, some of which I'm showing to you today, with masking, and then with flicking, and with putting stuff on the surface and then taking it off. I don't know whether you know about, we'll probably do a bit down here actually, when we get onto the road, but salt, putting salt onto the paint, a freshly painted paint surface will take the paint off again and leave beneath it a granular pattern that can be really, really useful. What I'm painting over here is what will be an array of sunshine that is coming down. It will be very faint in the end, and it will be just a discoloration of the background in the end. At the moment it will be blanked out. I'm being very careful not to, there we go, not to slip over the masking and onto the car, because what I'm laying down here is a background colour that will vary slightly as I go around, and it is more of a wash technique at the moment than anything else. What I will be doing in a minute, as it dries, is I will be then going over, dry brushing in dark areas to create the shadow zones. As I do this, you're starting to see the masking fluid appearing underneath, and you're getting some idea of the function of that masking fluid. Now there's a gap up here where the light is shining through, and it shows that there's the edge of the trees. So I'm just going to leave that there, that little bit up the top there where where the light is. Going to leave that. Get these in there. All that this is at the moment, this green that I'm actually putting on, is a mixture in varying intensities, not planned particularly in regard to intensities at the moment, but it's a mixture of varying intensities of sap green and burnt umber. The burnt umber taking the edge off the brightness of the sap green. And we got, there we go. Do not be afraid of getting a depth of paint in an area. There is a tendency that watercolour painters who are starting out have to worry about getting too much paint on, I suppose, really. But you know, don't be afraid of it, and especially in these dark areas. What I'm doing now is I am adding into the colour that I've just put on. While it's still wet, I'm working wet in wet so that we don't get sharp edges at the moment, in some almost pure Payne's grey. Which will give us a nice sort of dark but still slightly bluey shadows. I'm working in sort of areas of shadow and areas of darkness to bring out the colour beneath it in many respects, actually. Don't know whether you can see it there on the screen. You know, you can, I suppose you can treat this as my sort of Bob Ross sort of channel in a way, but whereas, you know, Bob Ross's programs last about 20 minutes with adverts in, this is going to be a few hours as usual, because actually, I don't know whether you know this, I don't know whether I mentioned it before, and you've heard me mention it before, there's a really good documentary on YouTube, if you dig it out, all about Bob Ross and his the way he made his Joy of Painting channel and everything, the way it became so big. And those paintings that you see, that painting that you see during the program that you see Bob paint, to actually get the 20-minute program all sorted, Bob painted that exact same painting 3 times. So the picture that you see on the canvas, on the easel, is not always the same painting. It's different, pardon me, different views of 3 different paintings. And that's what it took to actually get that editable down into 3 minutes. Now what I'm being able to do on this side, because this side is drier than that side, is I can now, I'm not painting wet into wet anymore, I'm painting wet onto dry with a fairly dry brush, which I can now sort of scrape across the surface of the paper in places, and as I do that we'll get little marks, and those little marks become leaves and sticks and all the things that make up foliage. And then that's a bit wet, but it doesn't matter because this is actually going to be a dark shadow area down the bottom here. And I'm still working totally with pure Payne's grey, not mixed with anything else. When I'm flicking upwards because things grow upwards, and also there's no danger if I flick upwards of flicking downwards and getting things on the getting any paint on the car. That's what I'm concerned about. So I don't know whether you can see there. I'll get it a bit closer to the camera. You can see that we're getting a textured background that the eye will believe eventually is a trees. Because let's face it, to be honest, when you look at this painting, what you're going to see is a car. That's what you're going to see when you look. I've just gone a little bit over there, so just being very careful to make sure I don't get anything on where that blue of that car is going to be. What you don't want to do is wash at this point. If you wash at this point, it will all go flat again. What you want to do is to dry brush or dab so that you're putting shapes in there, because that's what foliage is. It's lots and lots of shapes. Now we want to go very, very dark at the bottom of the bushes down here, so I'm just going to mix in with the Payne's grey some burnt umber, which creates a very almost black, and it's going on very thick. You have to be careful with Payne's grey. Sometimes when you apply it really thick, it will dry with a shine, so which you don't necessarily want, so you've got to be careful in that way, but that should be okay. And again over here, just in the depths of the dense foliage. Right, we can let that dry, and then we can take off the masking fluid that's on it and work that then. Another Bob Ross fact that you may know or you may not know is that sort of soft-spoken, gentle man that we saw on the Joy of Painting series with these little fluffy animals and all the rest of it, his previous career had been in the US Army. I can't remember what the title of his position was, but it was a position that needed quite a strong, tough soldier, and you just would not have thought, would you, looking at Bob Ross with his little animals and his paintbrushes and everything, of this guy with his without that afro, with his hair, you know, shorn close like they do in the American Army. You just couldn't imagine it. Yeah. So, what time is it in Texas? It must be quite early still, about 9 o'clock, about 9:30, something like that. You have got up early. I do forget sometimes when I'm doing all this that in different parts of the world, people are either getting up, they're still sleeping, or they go to bed. There we go. Actually, maybe as that, maybe I will just leave that to dry now, totally, and start to work on the road surface. I think that'd be a good idea. We want to try and get this background in as quickly as we possibly can. Now, I'm about to work on the road surface, but you notice back here that there is a piece of latex there and there, which has been to give us the line, which is going to blur out in the end of the foliage. So I'm going to just see. This sometimes works, it sometimes doesn't. So let's see. If I put my fingernail there and I scrape away at the latex that's there, I should be able to. Yes, I've done it. That's it. I've removed just a part of the latex masking there to allow us to work the foreground and background together, and I'm going to do the same here. Just get my thumbnail there, get the more difficult here. I've got our trees as well, are they? Get my thumbnail there, get the that's done it. We've done it. So that's removed that little bit of latex that was there. So we can now work the background and the foreground into each other as we get to that area. First thing I'm going to do over the whole of the foreground area here is I'm going to lay down a very light, very pale grey wash that is going to be in this area here, very visible, and the same here as we come down, but it will go over the whole thing. There's no point not doing it. It's going to be the lightest part of this grey, pardon me, this grey mess, grey thing, whatever. So let's get ourselves a grey. I'm going to have a mixture of neutral tint, which is a nice pale grey. When it's watered down, it's a nice pale grey in itself. We're going to mix it because if we, I don't know whether you can see it on that little picture there. Let's put the big picture on again for a minute. I don't know whether you can see it on your screen, but that's in the shadow area where the trees come down, and to some degree in the forehand as well. It's blue. It's an ultramarine blue. It's blue-grey, but it's definitely blue. So on the very lightest thing that we're going to put down, very lightest grey that we're going to put down there, I'm going to make it slightly, just slightly blue. And in the shadows it will be quite blue. Let's get more water on that. I don't want to run out, and I don't want it to be too dark. I want to get toying with the idea of rigging another camera up there above my head. Focus down, I don't know what you think, but another camera focused down on the palette area so that you can actually have a shot of me mixing the paints as well. I don't know whether that's what you want to see, but let me know. Yeah, that'll work. Don't have to worry too much about where the tyres are and things, because that is going to be, there we are, a little bit darker than that. It's going to be much darker than this, so it really doesn't matter. As is this area here. It doesn't matter if it's a bit uneven, because that will all come out in the wash, so to speak. In fact, we like it to be a bit uneven. It's the road. The road is rough. It's not just long with many a winding turn, as the Holly said. It's rough. The road is long, with many a winding turn. I love that song. Takes me to who knows where, who knows where. Lovely. I was lucky enough, back in the mid-80s, to do a concert with the Hollies at the place that I was working at, and I did the lighting for them, and it was, I mean, I've seen loads and loads of concerts in my life, my long life, but it was a wonderful concert. And one of the things that really stood out was the fact that they were their own support band. They did this thing where they came out, and the first half of the concert where the support band would be, I mean, they played it as if they'd been let down, as if the support band had not turned up, but it wasn't true. Let's let that dry for a bit. They were their own support band. They came on and basically did a totally acoustic set. Even the drummer came down and did something acoustic at the front. Before they came on in the second half and did, the full-on set. And it was absolutely splendid. It was lovely. It was I love, when you hear people who can do their hits and all that sort of thing with just an acoustic guitar, maybe an acoustic guitar and a bass or something, I think it's magic. I really love that. During lockdown, I've been watching all these Tiny Desk concerts. I don't know whether you've seen the Tiny Desk concerts, where all the people gather together. Famous artists come and they perform in what would be the corner of an office, and often they just do it with acoustic guitars or whatever, and it's magic. I'd never really bothered with Taylor Swift before. She was to me, she was something that young'uns watched and listened to and all that sort of thing. But I watched the Tiny Desk concert that she did, and just her and her acoustic guitar singing these songs, and it was magic. It was magic. It really brings things. It shows, it shows that they can really do it. We did go through a period, and hopefully we're coming out the other side of it, but we did go through a period where you never knew what was real and what wasn't, and things were plasticised, and it had turned out that the people that you were on stage we're actually just miming to a backing track, miming to the record, and nobody wants to see that. So there was a famous moment at a, I can't remember who it was or what it was, but I do remember a few years back, there was a famous moment at a sort of rock concert, quite a heavily sort of rock audience, and this sort of pop group had been booked as support, and very quickly this rock audience realised that these guys were miming to the record, and as soon as they realised it, all hell let loose, and they were throwing things at them on the stage, and it just turned into a riot. It was who wants to pay, whatever you're going to pay nowadays? Often you're paying more than £100 a ticket to go and see these big arena shows and everything. And who wants to see somebody miming? Really, you just wonder about the world, don't you? You do. I don't know whether you've seen another one. There's a documentary on online at the moment. I can't remember if it's on Amazon Prime or on YouTube, but it's Pink. I've never really sort of got into Pink or anything in the past as well, but it's a long documentary, and I came out of it a Pink fan. I really did. She was, I don't know whether you've seen her live shows or whether you've seen a video of the live shows, but she's doing this bit at the end of the show where they strap her into this harness and she flies over the top of this huge arena, just attached by her waist to this harness, which means that she can do all these somersaults. And when I say she flies over the top of this arena, she flies over the top of this arena. I mean, at one heck of a speed. And because it's all obviously computerized and computer controlled, there's this platform in the crowd that is literally about a foot wide. And they drop her with pinpoint accuracy onto this platform. She just puts one foot down and lands on this platform. But the point of this, why I'm telling you all this, just realised, you thinking I'm just rambling on, is that all this time she's still singing, and she's singing live, and you can tell that she's singing live because you can hear her breaths as she does it all, and she's upside down, she's spinning, and she's still singing live. And I thought, my goodness, you have my admiration, girl, you really do. This isn't exactly the same pattern as it is on the as it is on the photograph, but it's the nearest, damn it, from me, I tell you. Close enough for jazz, as they say. I'm doing this, you can see that it makes, I'll put paint on, it'll take to the surface. I'll dab the paint off so that the water is still, paper is still slightly wet, and then I'll paint into that little bit again, only as I paint into that little bit again, I'm painting onto wet paper. So the first thing will give me a dry, and then the second passage and the passage that come after will give me a wet, and so we get a combination of soft marks and hard marks. A little bit of raw Payne's grey there, just to where the background meets the road, where the foliage meets the road, just to soften it up, bring it into the, that's it, so there's no hard line there. That's good, that's good, I'm happy with that. Oh, just have a drink, getting a bit hot and sweaty in this little studio again, I tell you. If I was in Texas myself at the moment, I think I'd just be in an oven. However, in these warmer countries, they have ways, don't they, of dealing with the heat that we don't have this in this country, because we don't get enough of it. We live in what they call a temperate climate here in the UK, don't we? And what that basically means a lot of the time is, when it gets hot, we're not prepared for it. When it gets cold, we're not prepared for it. So now the background there is fine. The foreground here, is going to be smooth underneath. I've just realised you can't see what I'm doing. I've still got that picture on the screen. You know, you have to remind me if I do things like that. There we go. That you can't see what I'm doing. You know, please send me a message and say, why are we still looking at just a picture, photograph of the car? There we go. Now you can see what I've been doing. You missed me paint all those shadows underneath the road there. There we go. So we want some texture in the road surface here, and we want some texture here in the what do we call it, on the pavement. How are we going to get that? I think we're going to get that by a combination of techniques. I think I painted this dark enough to do what I want to do, and I certainly have done there, because what we're going to want is going to get some texture is made up, when it's the surface texture, it's made up, isn't it, of highlights and shadows. It's made up of pits and raised bits. I don't know what they call the raised bits, but basically you've got and the raised, as the light hits the texture of an uneven surface, you will get highlights, and then you will get directly behind that, where it goes deeper, you'll get a shadow. So you want a mixture, if you're creating a textured surface, of light and dark. So we're going to see if we can do that. And I think what I will do first is to paint in this area here the darker-ish sort of colours in a broad sense. Oops. Okay, enough on the brush there. Rookie error. Trying to judge whether I'm going dark enough. Now also, actually, I've just noticed it is slightly purple, so I've just added a touch there of purple into that area. Well, I say touch. What I did was add a dab of alizarin crimson into the same bluey grey that I've been using for the shadows. It doesn't matter too much about the line that I'm sort of doing there. Go over it slightly because that is actually going to be much darker, so we're going to paint that darker. I don't want to go too dark yet, but I do want to get it coloured, that's it. I'll leave it at that for the minute. Let's just take that bit off there. I won't bother with it there. Now I'm going to let that dry. Yeah, I'll do. I've got to let that dry because what I'm going to do next involves masking fluid. That's a surprise for you, isn't it? More masking fluid. Me and my joy of masking fluid. This is not the joy of painting, this is the joy of masking. Indeed. Right. While that dries, I'm going to take the masking fluid off the top section. And work on that. How long have I been doing this now? Probably about an hour and a half, maybe. Maybe a little longer. Sorry, yeah, an hour and a half, yeah. Oh, shouldn't have, maybe, yeah. I'll be careful around that bit because that is actually going to now see, this is where I realise as I take this off that the bluey colour that I put underneath with the flowers is nowhere near dark enough. Interesting. Yeah, even people like me that do this all the time and have been doing it for a very, very long time will make mistakes. There we are. I will remask that to protect that area on the car, but for the moment let's take it off. Let's take all this off. We can remask it in a little while. Okay, that I think we've taken off all the masking that we put there. Now it is vaguely like the flowers that were there, but they are far too bright and far too light. So what we're going to do is we are going to do something about that. We're going to get some light bluey colour. We can use the colour that we've done here down the foreground, only not so dark, not so dark. And we're going to go into this, and we're going to put some on. That's better. And take it off again. And dab it. We can still leave the occasional highlight, but on the whole, let's bring it down, bring the key of it down, the chroma key. I'm talking in computer language here. Ignore this bit because that is going to be totally white, because that's going to be the flare of the thing. We can at this point make sure that we delineate the roof nicely. You know, sometimes when I get these subjects to paint, especially when, you know, I get cars to paint and everything, and I actually enjoy painting the background and the road surface more than I actually enjoy painting the subject itself. I don't think that's uncommon. I used to say that about oh gosh, what was his name? Gainsborough. Thomas Gainsborough, famous painter, of course, known primarily as a portrait painter. Now what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to soften this. I don't want any harsh lines particularly, because this is, and what I'm also going to do is I'm going to, where I've got the foliage here, I'm going to wet it. I have to do this carefully and blur it, make it go really lighter, much lighter at this point, because this is where it's affected by the lens flare. So here you can see this is the other technique of watercolour that people don't take enough notice of. There's this myth, as I've mentioned many times, there's this myth that people have that watercolour is unforgiving. You know, once you put it on, that's it. Nope, that ain't true. Once you put it on, if you know what you're doing, you can take it off and create different effects by taking it off than putting it on. And this here is going to be a case in point, because this is just a lens flare and it's way, way, way too bright and prominent at the moment. But I'm going to almost paint it out and then put it back in again. leave that till it dries. Then we'll do something clever with it. A little bit further down the line. That's alright, it's working nicely. Let's work some, this is nearly dry enough down here to start working down here. Right, now let's get some darks and make these shapes a little bit more believable as flowers, as blossom. Let's work in the what we've got, but instead of it being blobby, we don't want it to be big blobbies. We can just go over the shape with some dark paint and leave the white paint in light, well, the light paint, the light colour below, in a different way, and hopefully we can make it look much more realistic as blossom. As I've mentioned before, you know, if you get yourself a good brush, if you get yourself a brush that does what this brush does, holds a lot of paint but goes to a lovely fine working tip, then you can do almost the entire painting with one brush. You don't need all these dozens of brushes if you get one good brush, to be honest. They're not always easy to find, and they don't have to be expensive, as I explained to people in an earlier one of these videos. This brush that I'm working with is part of a pack from a store that we have over here in the UK that sells budget books and budget art supplies and everything, called The Works. And this is part of a pack of brushes from The Works. I think probably £3 or £4 for about a dozen brushes. And well, you can see what I'm doing with it. You can see what I can do with it. It's let's take it out a little bit and make it a little bit more. Yeah, I'm trying to prove to you what you can. I'm trying to explain to you what you can do with just a little, just a cheap brush, as long as it works. Brush. It's synthetic. It's not, you know, squirrel hair or anything like that. It's nylon. But hey, look what it does. A clever thing. These bits above the car here are too prominent, and so all the flowers are still too prominent probably. But we can just take them down. We can lose some of them. We can I don't know if any of you can actually, when you're listening to these videos that I'm doing, if you're conscious of a sort of humming or buzzing on the sound, I've tried my best to close mic myself here so that we can cut a lot of it out. But if you can hear it, what it is, there's a pleasant, as well as the computer fan, which is down below my knees, which is sort of, well, further to the right of me, and as far away from the microphone as I can get it. there was a fluorescent tube above my head, and the fluorescent tube hums, and I'm rather stuck with it, but hopefully it's not too irritating. Sometimes if I turn it off and on again, it gets better. And sometimes it makes no difference whatsoever. We'll have to see. Oh, there we go. That's more or less dry down there. What I'm going to do now is I am going to do... This is a Joe Dowden technique if I ever saw one. I am going to get a piece of paper, he says, looking for a piece of paper in an art studio. Oh, excuse me, it's on the floor down here. This is where it gets complicated because I'm so tightly rammed in here that I have to get off the chair and move the half the furniture around to get to things when they fall on the floor. We want a piece with a nice straight edge for what we're doing. With a pair of scissors. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mask off everything now. This is going to be one of those rubber masking things that I did the other day. This is just going to be a piece of paper stuck down with a little bit of masking tape. But you're going to see why in a moment. God. The floor in here is the same floor as is on the patio outside, and it's actually sort of rather ornate, nice slabs, you know, like you call them slabs, like whatever, pieces of, that's it, about there, that's fine. Stone, pieces of stone, and which is really nice, and it's nice because you don't have to worry about it keeping it over clean and all that sort of thing and messing around with it. But it does mean that this chair that I'm sitting on, it's got wooden feet, it's a bar stool actually, it does mean that it gets rather how shall we put it, it gets rather stuck. Right, okay, I'm thinking at the same time here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some masking fluid, and I have an old toothbrush, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put some masking fluid onto the bristles of the brush. Now I don't want too much because I don't want blobs. What I want to do is to be able to flick the masking fluid and get a tiny flecks, and for that you don't need too much. What you do need, I see that's too much there, that's better. Right, just checking it out there. Now what I'll do as I'm flicking this, I'll start by flicking onto the paper to get rid of the big blobs, and then once we've got rid of the big blobs, then we can start flicking, and we've got a bit of, that's better, that's fine. we got some smaller blobs down here that we can, doesn't matter if you get a big one, to be honest, but what you're getting is what you want is the tiny speckles for this sort of surface. You see, you have to be careful. You don't want that big blob that we got there. You don't want, if you get too much, that's it. Go a bit further away. And what we're doing, and it's not paint, remember, so don't worry about it. Oh, it's stuck forever. It's latex. It's going to be rubbed off. And what it's going to leave when we rub it off, it's going to leave the colour of the surface underneath. There we are. Leave that like that and let that dry. Once that's dry, we'll take the wash the latex off the toothbrush, which you can do when it's not too, there we go, before it's dried properly. You can wash it off. We'll take that down to the colours that we want that area of the pavement to be. And what the masking fluid that we'll do, that we just put on, will do, and it's a lot more of it than you can actually see with the naked eye there. But what that will do is, of course, that will leave the colour that it is at the moment underneath for us as some highlights. We'll then take it down to the colours that it's going to be in the end, which are fairly deep. Let that dry, and then we'll flick some very dark paint in the same manner onto that area. And bit by bit, pardon me, we will get that textured effect that we're looking for. Do not jump the gun. These little flecks will dry quite quickly, so we shouldn't be too long there. Obviously there's nothing I can do in the meantime, so I'll just keep chatting to you. As that dries, let's go back and have a look at the painting, the picture that we were working on. And how this, one of the things is, when I'm doing this, and it's something that you bear in mind a lot when you are painting for a living, is that I've got no control over what you see to some degree. I'm painting a painting here and I'm using colours, particular colours, to do that. I'm using mixtures of paint that come out in a particular way. What you're looking at is a computer screen or a phone screen or whatever, and the colours of each one of those screens that you can look at will all be slightly different. That's the way it is. And if you're looking on a Mac, it will be different than if you're looking on a PC. You will see the colours differently. So I've got no control over what you finally see. All I can do is make it right at my end. So sometimes when I'm talking about particular colours and all that sort of thing, you might not be able to see it in the same way that I do, and I just would like you to remember that and take that into account as we're doing this. If I do something and I say, look, you can see the sort of purple here, if you can't see that purple, then you'll just have to trust me that there is purple there. It seems to mess around a lot. The camera, the digital camera, and the computer screens and everything seem to mess around a lot with blues and purples. They can have trouble with purples. It's really strange. I mean, it's a lot better than it used to be. A lot better than it used to be. I remember a time oh gosh, probably about 15 years ago. And I was photographing things to put them uh, for sale on eBay at the time. And these it was clothes, and they were beautiful purple. And I was photographing them, and when you put them onto the got them onto the phone and put them onto the computer screen, they were blue. It would just not get the purple. It was so frustrating, so irritating. Right, so let's have a little look here. I think there's one blob that's a little bit bigger than the others, that I think rather than have it there, I'll just take it off. The Joy of Tweezers. I can leave that one. No matter the one slightly on the others. Right. One thing you have to be careful of is not to do what I have just done. I've just noticed this. It does come off, but it's a bit of a pain. I have just not noticing here. I've just flat latex all over the screen of my phone. So all those little specks and dots are now all over the screen of my mobile phone. Right, sorry, I'm going a bit quiet there. Just replying to people on my phone that are messaging me as I'm doing this. There we go. Okay, so now then, let's get the darker colours on. Okay, this is one occasion where occasionally I have in the past when I wanted some highlights, just splattered a little bit of white gouache over the top. If the splattering technique and the masking technique hasn't given me enough of what I've wanted, or sometimes you do it and you get too much. I think this might be just enough actually. this is definitely slightly bluey, purpley, dark. So I'm trying to get that in there a little bit. Take this bit down a little bit and key. There we go. And roughen the edge up on it, because it's actually, otherwise we don't get the textured stone feeling. We don't get the rough edge to it. And see if this will do what I want it to do. I want a different feel to the right to the edge of the pavement, so trying to make sure I get the perspective right here. Piece of kitchen roll over there. There we go. And we've got a bit more. There we go. And make that in there, same colour, with a little bit more red in it. That's it. That's it. And here, just rough this up again. There we go. And now we're going to let that dry. Which won't take too long. Again. Oh. What you've written there, Karen. Let's see. One of the most important lessons I had to learn was seeing beyond the actual image I was painting. Oh, very, very true. To see the extra colours that weren't obvious. This added sparkle you put in with the masking fluid, this was something I am just learning to see. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I very much, I don't know whether I mentioned it in the first video that I did the other day, but I'm very much of the belief that the art of actually becoming an artist is partially about techniques and learning how to handle the paint and how to handle the brushes and how it all moves and how it all works on the paper and all that sort of thing. But the biggest I think thing that you have to train yourself to do as an artist is to see the world differently to other people, to see the world in a way that other people don't see it. That's what it all comes down to in the end. Now you'll notice if I just lift the edge up here, it's a bit underneath, doesn't matter, because that's going to be darker than this, so we don't worry about that. So that's why I haven't properly masked it down here. I think that's dry enough now to do what I want to. But you have to, I remember spending hours and hours and hours as I was learning to paint. Not actually painting at all, but just sitting and looking at things and seeing them almost for the first time. And to be honest, even now, all these years on, if I sit and look at a scene, if I sit and look at something, I mean, at the moment I'm looking out of the window here at the trees and there's a certain patch of trees out there between it's in the trees over the other side of the field that I'm looking at, and I've only just noticed for the first time that there's a tree right in the centre of this patch of trees that is at the moment covered in red berries. I haven't noticed it before. I've seen it for day after day after day, but I've not really noticed it because we see things rather than notice them a lot of the time. We don't really see them. We don't actually focus on them, and it's only when we focus on them that we start to see what's there. And this little patch of trees has got a willow tree that's quite tall, where the branches and the leaves are drooping down a little bit, and the bark on this tree is very light, and so that there are one or two light branches in there at the top that almost look like gaps in but they're not. They're the actual branches. And next to that, I don't know what that tree is next to it, but next to that there is a dead tree, but it's a dead tree that is almost bleached white. The tree is it, and so that is an interest. You know, if you're going to do that on watercolour, you've got to be careful and take that out, preserve that with masking fluid before you even start. And then there's this tree with the orangey, reddy sort of berries on it. That's a lighter leaf, and in just this one little patch of trees, there are so many textures and so many colours. And as I've been talking, in the last few seconds, the sun has gone behind a cloud or whatever, and they've all changed colour. And you know, this is the one of the real joys of painting, is the joy of actually realising that you can start to see the world in a way that you've not done in the past, and a way that you don't most of the time. And it's fascinating. And if I was to look at that and think, then how would I depict that? How would I depict that in watercolour? I can see that I would have to do a combination of different masking techniques and different dry brushing techniques, and those trees, in between those trees and me sitting here, we've got a small apple tree in my garden. It's not very tall, but that's in the foreground, and then there's a sycamore tree whose leaves are even closer to me, that you can actually see all the individual leaves and the shapes, some of which are against that green background and some of which are silhouetted shapes against the sky. That's the joy of becoming an artist. Being able to look at something and start to analyse it and take it apart and say, right, how would I depict this in my way, in my style? I mean, that's the thing. Your style comes from working. You know, it doesn't just appear overnight. Your style grows as you grow as an artist. What you can do when you start out is very different from what you can do when you've been doing it a while. I can do things now that I could never do when I first started. You get revelations. You know, I I remember very much one time I was struggling to find a technique with oil painting, and I've been struggling to get it. If you can just bear with me while I don't actually use words that are that eloquent, but yeah, I've been struggling to really sort of pin it down, and I wasn't sure. I wasn't happy with what I was doing, and I met another artist. I was doing I was working in Buxton at the time, in the Peak District in England, and I met another artist, a chap by the name of Laurie Williamson. He was a lot older than me at the time, been painting for years, and he sort of took me under his wing a little bit, and he invited me to his house to do a portrait of me. And I had the wonderful experience of watching him paint this thing, because the way he did it was he sat me down and he turned his back almost to me, and I could see the canvas as he was painting, and he would turn around and look at me, then turn back to the canvas and paint. So I watched him applying paint, and all of a sudden, watching him apply paint, I realised something that I had not realised before, and that was how to apply washes, translucent washes of oil paint, in different areas of the canvas, and how to, I learned I learned so much by watching Laurie do this, and it didn't take long doing the portrait, about an hour and a half, and it was done, and it was a big one, and he gave it to me. It's upstairs, but I went home, and for a week I tried to paint like Laurie, and failed over and over and over again, and in the end I thought, I'm not going to get this. It's just not. I don't get it. And then I was standing in the Pavilion Gardens in Buxton one day, and I set my easel up, and I've got a canvas on it, and I was using oil paints, and I was trying to paint this picture, and it was awful. It was miserable, this painting. It was just horrible. I hated it. I hated what I was doing. And all of a sudden, I had a thought. I had a little Damascus moment, and I had a revelation, and I packed up my kit, and I hightailed it back to this derelict building that's in Buxton that I was using as a studio, and I sat down and I got a small canvas, not much bigger than the watercolour that you see me working on at the moment, and I started to paint, and I realised that I could take the essence of what I'd seen Laurie doing, and I could put it onto the canvas in a very similar way to the way I'm applying the watercolours here, and within a couple of hours I got a painting like I'd never done before, and it actually came from watching somebody else trying to paint like them, not succeeding, failing to paint like them, but all of a sudden just seeing the possibilities. Little story there again, sorry, going off on one, but got to do something while the paint dries. Anyway, what we've got here is some dark paint that is, I'm applying just to the ends of the brushes, and I'm going to do the same thing here. as I did before, only I just want to make sure I don't cover this bit too much. And what we get in here, we put in the highlights with the masking fluid, and now we're putting in the shadows in the texture with some dark paint. And what we should have, when all this dries and I take off the masking fluid, is a stone-like texture. Brush. It's amazing what you can do with an old toothbrush, or all sorts of brushes. I don't know whether you've seen, there's a painting channel that we get, I think it was, I don't know whether it was on, was it on cable over here, satellite or whatever. There's a society over here called Society for All Artists, and the idea is that anyone can enjoy painting, which is absolutely great. And they had something to do with this channel, I think, this painting channel, and different people were teaching on it, and they'd give lessons and everything on this channel. And I was watching it one day, and this guy came on, and I go, oh, and it was a chap that I knew from 20 years before, something like that. A really nice guy, a great artist by the name of Peter Woolley, a watercolour landscape artist. And I'd known him years before when I was just getting going painting, really, and trying to work out a way to do things in the Peak District in Buxton. And Peter and I had done a couple of sessions together where we had people over and had them, Peter would take them for a hike, and so an outdoor painting and drawing session or whatever on one day, and the next day I'd bring them into the studio and we'd do studio work and do studio painting, and we got on great. But all of a sudden that was Peter doing this painting channel sort of thing, and he started to talk, and I thought, what I wasn't sure what he was talking about. Has anybody seen one of these? This is a stenciling brush for stippling. The idea being that you put a stencil down, you put the paint on the ends of the brush, and you do this over the stencil, and you don't get any creep onto the stencil. And you can put textures if you want, or you can do it until you've got a flat surface. These have been around since since stenciling was invented as a decorative form many 2 or 3 centuries ago at least. They've been around forever, and they're really good for doing things like I was just doing with the paintbrush. You can flick with them, you can do all sorts of things with them. And Peter was talking about these brushes, and he's calling it Woolley's Wonder Brush. That's his name, Woolley. And I thought, Woolley's Wonder Brush. And then I went into Hobbycraft one day, and there on the shelf in a packet was Woolley's Wonder Brush. And he's marketing these things as these wonderful creative tools. And they are great, they're great, but it's a stenciling brush. So it's been around forever, but he's rebranded it. And good on him if he's made a few quid out of it, to be perfectly honest. Don't begrudge anybody making a few quid out of an idea. But if you see one of these on the shelves, you can either think of it as a stenciling brush, or you can think of it as Wally's underbrush. It doesn't matter, but you can do all sorts of things with it, like I was just doing there. I'm going to take this off. There we go. And I'm going to just put a little bit of texture onto the surface of the this area here. Now, I don't want the brush to be too wet. Oh, it's too wet. See, I could have done all the stippling and everything stuff on this bit and created that texture, but I think it's not really worth it for such a small area. To be honest, it's just as easy just to put in a few little dibs and dabs of paint and speckle them in, and just it's enough. It's just something just to tell the eye that this is rough. See, I could take it all the way underneath here, and I could do the spraying thing underneath here as well and create these textures. I don't think it's needed. A little bit of here and there, whatever, doesn't matter, it's going to be painted over, just fiddle in. So that now should be dry enough to remove the masking. And as we remove the masking, very carefully, with a finger, now sometimes when you've done this you might think, oh actually I need to speckle a little bit more of the dark colour in there, which is perfectly fine, and I think I might actually do that. But I don't know whether you can see there, what we're getting is a rough stone-like texture. And I will, now I've taken that off, because of course some of the black dots that you put on over there, they will they'll land on top of the latex, and so they will they'll disappear as you take the latex off. So that's better. That's better. There we go, one pavement stony road surface. And the next thing that will go in is the shadow underneath the car, which I will combine to some degree with the tyres. Now one thing that you saw me do this on the cars that I worked on the other day as well. There are some parts of this that are very, very dark and very, very sharp. And to get that sharpness and get the dark line in there with watercolour is very fiddly, time consuming, and to be honest, quite unnecessary. What we actually want is to be able to get that dark in a precise way. And that's what these do. That's what these pens do. By using these, we can get in the sharp lines. That will combine beautifully with the watercolour when we put it on. What you've got to make sure of when you do this is that the pens that you are using are pigment pens. They're not dye, they are pigment. These are pigment pens. They are paint pigment. They are just the same as the pigment that is in a watercolour paint or in a an oil paint, because actually when it comes down to it, pigment is the pigment that is in paints is the same. It's the binder that makes the difference. So the pigment, the colouring in an oil paint is the same pigment, it's the same colouring as the pigment in a watercolour. And so it's just a different binder. A watercolour combines it with traditionally a gum, maybe gum arabic or I think it's what called Ganton gum or something like that. And whereas an oil paint combines it with, pardon me, I think I'll do. An oil paint combines it with oil, linseed oil, and a binder quite often as well of some kind. That is going to look good. You'll see those pens come out again in a little while when we start working on the car. Okay, so let's get using the same colour that we were using before, the mixture of neutral tint, Payne's grey and ultramarine blue, French ultramarine. We're going to put in the shadow areas underneath the car. So now the shadows are not consistently dark, they vary. That's nowhere near dark enough. Needs a lot more pigment in there to make it dark enough. Let's try that. The shadows are not consistently dark. They are, again, not dark enough. That's better. They are darker as they get further underneath the car, and then they get lighter as they get into these areas where they're just meeting the sunshine. So we're trying to take that into account. I want to get this line straightish, but I'm doing it freehand rather than masking it because it is a stone. It's not a piece of steel or something like that. It's got a cut edge, so it doesn't matter if it's a little bit wonky. In fact, you'll probably benefit from being slightly rough and wonky. Now I'm going to take this underneath here and put in the shadow shape, but just as it goes underneath into the sunlight, I'm going to take a little bit out of it just to make it a little bit more see-through. That's it. Now feed back into that. I'll take a little bit out there. That's alright. Doesn't matter if it's not there on the photograph. Nobody's going to see the photograph. They're going to see my painting, and that's all. I'm going to get darker. I'm going to show a little bit more alive raw pigment in this darker area just underneath the running board. Now remember, it doesn't matter a bit if I go over there because that's masking fluid. I've protected the running board with the masking fluid. That's the nice dark that we want. And we'll bring that dark. Hasn't got quite enough water in it to flow. That's still not dark enough, Stephen. That's it. Yeah, might have to have a couple of coats, you never go. But we'll bring that dark into play under here. And if we need it sharply darker, I can do something about that with the pigment brushes after. Okay, that will need to be darker than that. Let's put some pure neutral tint in there as well. That's better. This is why the masking fluid here is a great help, because it means I can paint over it in the knowledge that I can reclaim it whenever I want to. this is all going to blend together in a minute with the tyres, because the tyres are in the darkness. They're not going to be totally delineated, but there will be a slight difference here and there with the tyre colour. So if I put that line in first, it will occasionally appear or disappear as I put in the tyres. Now this is now going to come out underneath the car, but as it comes out, it's going to get more bluey, with a hint of red to make it slightly purpley bluey. And it's going to get more translucent, transparent, just either, however you want to call it, as it gets here. So the further it gets out, the more transparent it's going to be. And then it will blend in with the dark as it further it gets underneath the car. We don't want a line to appear, we want it to blend. So I'm working on it quite quickly. That's what I'm trying to get. As you can see there, I don't know how well you can see it on the screen there, but that blends from a blue, a transparent blue at the front here, to being almost black underneath the car in a gentle gradient. Let's now put in the tyres as well, which are a similar sort of colour, a little bit more of the red in there, combined with a little bit more of the neutral tint, I think, probably. Touch of the blue to add to it. Touch of the red. Right. Now let's start off with this back one. Is it dark enough? Yes, it is. It will get darker as it gets towards the bottom and it gets towards the front, but we'll work on that as we go. Taking very great care against the edge of the wheel arch. Don't want to make that seem misshapen. Taking it now down to a darker shade as we come down here, so it's almost the same colour as the shadow on the road. I've made a mistake there. I've lost the line of the pavement, so let's claim it back quickly. That's it. Doesn't matter about, you know, it's still got the sharpness back. With the dark paint, that's it, that's better. We all make mistakes, no matter how long we've been doing it. Whatever the reason, sometimes we're just getting tired. Sometimes we've been painting for too long, which you might suspect might be the case in this particular session. I think, to take a break, and this is as good a time as any. We have now basically done the background, and we are ready to mask out the car, line up the car, which we'll do next, and then start to apply the blue paint. So I'm going to take a little break. It's now 20 to 4. I'll probably have an hour and then come back for, well, I don't know, I'll put it online. I'll announce when I'm coming back, and then I'll have another session, probably masking and lining up and putting in darks before we get on to actually putting in that paintwork. So the next session, maybe half an hour, we'll see. And then I'll take a little break. There might be 3 sessions this one. We'll have to see. I might have to have a session later on this evening, or maybe I'll finish it off in the morning, I don't know. But as you can see, we've got the background in. We're cooking with gas. I shall leave it at that, and I shall be back back soon when I've had a little bit of a break. Thanks for watching.